So I haven't done something super controversial on the channel in a while, so why don't we do that? Let's talk romance options. There are a lot of different ways to approach how you set up your romance options. And I'm talking about how you decide who's romanceable by who and what kind of fidelity each of these romances get. So I just talked about Dragon Age 2, so let's talk about Playersexual. Playersexual romances are what Dragon Age 2 does for almost all of their romances. If a romance option is playersexual, that means they effectively don't have a sexuality at all until they encounter the player. And then in the moment that they encounter the player, their sexuality is now locked into whatever sexuality would be required to allow them to romance the player. If the player is male and they are male, then they are now gay. If the player is male and they are female, they are now het. Playersexual is different from pansexual or bisexual in that the romance option actually doesn't have the ability to discuss their past sexuality pretty much at all, because their sexuality pretty much burst into being at their moment of their encounter with the player. Which is why I say that not all the romance options in Dragon Age 2 are playersexual. Isabella is not playersexual. She is pansexual, and she is a romance option regardless, and she can talk about her sexuality all as she wants, because her sexuality actually exists before the game and continues to exist after the game. So a lot of people, when they say everyone in all games should be bisexual, really what they mean is everyone in all games should be playersexual. Because what they're saying is, they're saying, I want more options to romance for me. And that's the major advantage of playersexual, is all romances that you write that are playersexual are available to all possible players. The matrix of romance options is very simple. There is no matrix. Everyone is available to everyone. But the problem is that it actually really restricts the options from a storytelling perspective. If the romance option only has a sexuality with regards to the player, then that takes a lot of things about their past off the table, or you at least have to write carefully around that. So that's why BioWare has largely moved away from playersexual. It's quick, it gets you romances that cover a wide variety of options very quickly, but it actually does hurt the ability to make as engaging of a romance as you potentially could, or at least it ties your hands to some degree. Now, that being said, I do believe that you could legitimately write a playersexual romance who isn't playersexual from the perspective of we just don't discuss it and it snaps into being and then locks into place, but more from the perspective of this character has never considered romance until this moment. They find you to be such an engaging and entrancing character that you've awakened them something within them, and now they are open to the prospect of romance. Bit of a different twist on playersexual. I think doing that does leave some options on the table, but you're not going to do that for every single romance option in the entire game. Because that's going to start to strain credibility pretty quickly. The thing that people ask for, and I think they're actually asking for playersexual, but the thing that people ask for is just make everybody pansexual, just make everyone bisexual. The reality is that most people don't actually want that. They don't want characters who have had a varied past of different romantic partners. They want someone who sort of matches their sexuality. Now, some people probably want exactly that, but I think when most people are asking for make everyone bisexual, what they're really saying is, give me more options. I didn't find an option that I liked, but they're not looking to have their own sexuality potentially challenged by a character either. So I don't really believe that everyone being truly bisexual is actually a true option. Certainly you could write a game that way and keep the options on the table, but I think what you will find is that it would be necessary to essentially start to start to slowly push some of that sexuality into the background until a lot of your characters move from being truly pansexual into being much more playersexual. And indeed, when you look at a lot of the bisexual romance options in Bioware games, usually when you sort of squint at them, I think you could probably believe that they were actually more playersexual than they were bisexual. Not all of them, but certainly some of them. Then you get to a fixed sexuality, which is what Bioware games have pretty much done since Dragon Age 2, which is that the follower or the romance option has a sexuality which is set at the point of writing. Might be heterosexual, might be pansexual, it might be gay. That doesn't change. And then the interaction between that romance partner and the player is determined based upon the interaction of the different sexualities. I believe that gives the greatest number of tools to the writer to write a more engaging story. An extreme example is Dorian. Dorian literally has loyalty missions based around his sexuality that could not exist if he were playersexual. But even other characters that exist, like Sarah or Blackwall, their sexuality is part of who they are, and it is something that comes up in the course of the storytelling. So by having it on the table, you're allowing for a higher fidelity of storytelling. I just fundamentally believe that. A couple more things before I tell you what I think games should do. Bromances are something that I think should be considered as part of the romance option suite. Classic example for Dragon Age is, of course, Varric. He has historically been written as if he was a romance option. He's given the number of words of a romance, but he's not a romance. He's your bud. He's got your back. He's never going to leave you. One of the reasons I think that people really like Varric so much is because he's given the attention and screen space of a romance option, but he's not a romance option. So I do think in your suite of romance options, bromances are something to keep on the table. A couple of things that have been sort of neglected in romance options, but I think we're starting to see, or we'll see pretty soon. The first is ace romance options, so asexual romance options. So this is some sort of deep relationship that doesn't involve a sexual component. I know that Bioware has been interested in exploring this space, but has had a lot of difficulty getting agreement from the community as to what an ace romance actually looks like. So I don't know if Dreadwolf will have an ace romance in it or not, but I think there's an interest out there to try to tackle this. I don't know that there's yet an agreement as to what that would be. So doing it and doing it wrong would probably be worse than not doing it at all. Romances with trans characters, I'm pretty sure we're going to see pretty soon, and I think the ability for players to be more open in their expression of gender identity and sexual identity is going to be broadened out. I mean, there are some weird complications for the character creation screen, but I think that's going to be tackled. So I do think that we are going to see non-binary players, non-binary followers, non-binary romances between non-binary characters, trans characters. I think we're going to start to see that burst through the walls pretty soon and enter into mainstream gaming. And then the last one is poly relationships. There's nothing really inherently difficult mechanically about poly relationships. The thing that I think has kept them, I think there are two things that have kept them out of games too much. The first is the idea of consent. If you have a player character and two followers and that you want to have a poly relationship, there's a consent between the two, necessary between the two NPCs that is something that would have to be thought about. But I honestly think that the second one is simply just a question of resources, which is to do a poly relationship, you have to decide whether or not you're going to consume 2 of your romance slots or try to make it so that those romance slots are available both as individual romances and a poly romance. So it could get very complicated very quickly. And that concept of resource usage brings me to something that I think is vitally is incredibly critical that you do when you are doing romances, which is do some sort of matrix. And what do I mean by a matrix? What I mean is you write the possible character races and genders and sexual orientations down this way, write all the possible romances this way, and just put a check mark in everywhere where a romance exists. And then look to see if you're underserving some of your groups. And when you're doing that, you need to look to see if romance options exist at all, but also you need to check and really be serious with yourself and make sure that you're not checking the box for one romance option, but underserving it from a fidelity perspective. If male straight romance options are all followers with full cutscenes and female gay romance options are all secondary characters and they're all in-game conversations, you haven't really provided an equal serving. So the reason that you do a matrix is to just see it out there and make sure that you haven't let your biases creep in and you're underserving one of the potential option states. And those conversations are incredibly awkward. I feel that you just have to do them, unless you're doing all playersexual, in which case I guess you can get away with it. Of course, as we increase the inclusivity and diversity in our romance options, this matrix gets more and more complicated. Do we have the risk of reaching the point where a fixed sexuality matrix is implausibly complicated, impossibly complicated, untenable? I don't think so. I think that we can stay inclusive, we can keep diversity in there and fill out the matrix that we create. So what's my advice? What do I think you should do in your game if you're taking on romance options? If you have the resources to properly fill out your matrix, I think you should do fixed sexuality. I think you should have a variety of straight and gay and bi characters as services their character arcs, and you should just make sure you have enough to have options available for all of the different kinds of players that could exist. That doesn't mean I don't believe you could write a playersexual character to insert into that matrix. That could be great. That could help fill out your matrix. If you do this, you are opening yourself up to criticism because you make this one character gay and your straight fan base is mad that they couldn't romance them. But I do think that if you've got the resources to make enough romance options, this gives you the greatest degree of fidelity. If you don't have the resources to do that, then I think playersexual is a way to go. Know that it's going to impact the available tools you have in terms of writing those characters, but it will let you get away with having a lot less romance options, because now with just 2 or 3 different followers, you cover almost everyone. Of course, none of this really helps you personally as the player if there isn't a romance option that appeals to you. I'm giving you the arguments I have for the dev side as to why I would choose fixed sexuality over playersexual. You as a player can certainly argue that this person, this follower, this romance option should have been available to you. It's not going to probably change anything, but I totally understand the frustration, and this really scratches at the edges of something that I'll probably do a video on later, which is that just because something causes the greatest quality improvement to the greatest number of people doesn't mean that there aren't people who are being shafted by that. If you're someone who feels like you've been shafted by the way that romance options are done, I'm sorry. This is why, but it doesn't fix it for you, does it? Those were my thoughts. I suspect this one is going to be controversial and probably demonetized because I talked about gay people and sex. So a special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you are interested in becoming a member, there'll be a link down in the description. If you found this useful, throw some money my way, either by becoming a member or by using the super thanks button. It's the little heart with the $sign down below. because I'm pretty sure this one's going to get demonetized. What did I get wrong? What are you mad about? Why should one of the characters that you couldn't romance in one of your favorite Dragon Age games have been playersexual? Let me know down in the comments. We can have a lively discussion. I will see you again soon. Thank you.